This is Dr. John Van Doorn coming to you on March the 16th, a couple of days before the PAC is going to meet once again to discuss a technology overlay that would supposedly govern the data centers that are proposed, the Project Ruby, and any future similar project that might come to Columbus. Looking at the new draft that was just issued a few days ago, it's not significantly different from the first draft, and it doesn't contain nearly the amount of detail and protective provisions that one would hope. So I'm going to end up calling for a moratorium at the end of this, but let me go through that and explain why I believe it's just not adequate for protecting the interests of all the citizens of Columbus now and into the future. So let's talk about what's in there and what's not in there. There are some interesting things that are in there. A couple of things that are probably good are the closed loop requirement for the water that's required to cool these vast computer systems that go with the data center. However, there's a big trade-off, which is not mentioned here, and that is when you have a closed loop system, you have to have more power to cool down the water so it can be recirculated like in your car radiator. And that's been known to boost the energy consumption to just gargantuan levels. Similar data centers go from 600 megawatts to, uh, 600 gigawatts to 900 gigawatts, which is about 3 times more than the entire city of Columbus uses. Where is that power going to be generated and how is it going to be generated? None of that is discussed in this technology overlay. Um, there are some height restrictions, but they're really ineffective because there's big exceptions for generators, towers, all kinds of things that might be put on top of the 7-story buildings that are allowed. So you can probably see those from miles away. Uh, there is no limitation on the height of fences or guard towers if they're more than 200 feet from the property line. One of the nice provisions is that it would be somewhat reduction of light pollution, so-called dark sky provisions, which require hooding over the lights. That's nice. Not a big deal because Columbus already has a lot of light pollution, but it's nice that it's in there. And there's also a decent opt-out clause if the city is unable to provide city utilities such as sewer and water in time for the start of the project, then the city can withdraw the permitting process and effectively shut it down. So those are nice, but they're not all that particularly strong. One of the more curious provisions in this document, and I'm not sure why it's in there, is a prohibition on cryptocurrency data mining. But really, how does that affect positively or negatively the citizens of Columbus? You could make a point that, in a social sense, and I talk about this in chapter 11 of my big book, Fundamental Perspectives on International Law, cryptocurrency is not great for currency stabilization around the world, but frankly, that's way beyond our concerns as citizens of Columbus. And again, frankly, is cryptocurrency any worse than an AI, or is AI any better than cryptocurrency? And I could make the case that it's not. I've seen the really negative impact of AI on my students' ability to write and reason and to express themselves logically and coherently over the last few years that AI has become in widespread use. So, in terms of social harm, I would make the argument that AI is probably worse than cryptocurrency. But even if you don't agree with that assessment, I'm not sure that the city of Columbus has the technical means to enforce this, and I suspect that a judge might strike this down as an unenforceable contract. So again, that's probably neither here nor there, and it doesn't really do anything for the public good of Columbus, Georgia. Now, having looked at those, oh, there's one other thing in there that's the sound limits, which sound good, but they're not prohibitions or absolute caps on sound. What they are is averaging sound. So theoretically, you could have long, sharp spikes up in sound for up to 15 minutes at a time, as long as the average over 30 minutes is not over 65 decibels or so. So in other words, you could have a spike of up to 120 decibels, which is super high, as long as it comes back down to about 10 or 20 decibels in the next 15 minutes. So I don't consider that a very effective prohibition on sound pollution, noise pollution. Now, having looked at those few, and those are quite frankly few restrictions or requirements in the technology overlay, there is so much that's missing or incomplete in this proposed technology overlay. The biggest one is what about catastrophes? What about runoff that is uncontrolled, leaching of heavy metals into the soil, industrial byproducts? None of that is covered in here. There's really no provision about how that would be policed in the first place. So it's just really, really inadequate when it comes to dealing with pollution, especially waterborne pollution that can seep down into the drinking water of the folks around there. Mostly have well water, and a site like this could easily pollute that in a way that would be irreparable harm for those citizens and for the water table for quite a long time to come. Another huge omission is there's no discussion whatsoever of how power is going to be brought into and out of the site. One of the biggest complaints we've seen in Fayetteville and South Bend, Indiana, and Mississippi, and a number of other real world data centers is these giant monopoles that simply blight out the landscape. Sometimes they go right through people's front yards, destroy property values, destroy the scenic aesthetic beauty of the surroundings. No discussion of that whatsoever. How would the right of way be determined? How would the placement of the monopoles be determined? Or is that just completely up to the discretion of the developer? And that's the way it appears to be. There are no limits on the power that's to be sent to the site and how that power would be generated. What I've seen is the current proposal is that power would be generated 80% from climate changing, greenhouse gas emitting fossil fuels. And if you live anywhere near, that's having a direct impact on your respiratory health, as well as going well up into the atmosphere and affecting everybody's health as it contributes to overall climate change. So with this many uh, problems with it, many omissions, the fact it's just basically incomplete. I'm sure the planning department did as well as they could on short notice and with a very small staff. We simply need to have a moratorium, and I would call for that moratorium to be through 2026, so that we can have an authority, a commission, a committee that's not like the usual hand-picked group of elites or boosters of a project, but would be composed of true independent subject matter experts in what I call a sortition of citizens. That is, citizens that are chosen at random from the voter rolls, so we or make sure we have a true cross section of the citizenry. Plus, we have adequate representation of citizens who live in the effective area that is probably within a 5 mile radius of the proposed Project Ruby data site there in far eastern Columbus. This will take time to do this right. And as we've seen in other communities where they've tried to rush it through, uh, folks are very unhappy with the result. Just this week, there was a recall petition of the entire city council in East Tulsa, Oklahoma. I believe it's Pryor. And I think they're going to recall the entire city council because there was a data center that was rushed through in the dead of night, no public input, no consideration of public opinion, and people are very unhappy with the results in terms of pollution, land use, so many concerns they have about how that was created. So this is Dr. John Van Doorn calling for a moratorium on further developments of the technology overlay and then subsequent approval or disapproval by the City Council. No fundamental decisions need to be made on this data center without much more study by truly independent experts and citizens.